So we have 2 weeks until Easter, and it seems like it's just rolling down really fast. But this story of Jesus takes place 1 week from the resurrection story. This is like the Palm Sunday. So next week we should be reading this story. So what we're doing is we're a little bit of ahead, and we're going to take 2 weeks to cover this story. The first week, this week, we're going to cover what it felt like for the crowd, in the perspective of the crowd. And next week, we are going to look at what it looks like through the lens of Jesus, as Jesus entered into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. But this story of Jesus entering this long-awaited Jerusalem moment is an event way bigger than we have ever imagined. Or maybe we even thought that it could have been. Nowhere in the story of Jesus in the Gospels, when Jesus entered into a town, there is a large public gathering waiting for him to enter. Like a cosmic wave of information going from person to person. Who is this guy that is entering Jerusalem? We have never seen any other story in the Gospels that this happened. And there are bits of information in history all flown all the way through this, which connect the Old Testament to the New Testament, which is so important. That everything in this, the history, happened for a reason. It was intentional. That was foretold a long time ago from Isaiah and Zechariah, hundreds of years before Jesus ever entered in Jerusalem. And the author Matthew, being a really Jewish man, made sure he put all of this information in details in every part of this story, which you will find incredibly interesting. So I would encourage you today, keep that Matthew 21 open. We're going to go through that. But before we do that, I want to read what the prophet said about this moment. In Zechariah 14:4, it said this: "On the day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward." Again, in Zechariah 9:9, it says this: "Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous, and having salvation is he, humbled and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." In Isaiah 62:11, it says this: "Behold, the Lord has proclaimed to the end of the earth. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your salvation comes." So when you read these prophecies and you see the beginning of Matthew, it feels like just a step-by-step moment that was happening from the beginning. It started on the Mount of Olives. When he arrives, stands on the Mount of Olives, he got on a donkey, on a colt, and moved towards Jerusalem, for salvation was coming, right? But salvation through death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So if you were a Jewish person in this time and you have read the Old Testament every single day, you have studied it from a young boy or girl all the way up until you're 12, 13, you have heard these stories over and over and over again. They would sit there on Saturdays and read from Isaiah and the prophets of this is what the salvation is going to come. This is what the Messiah is going to do. So when Jesus steps foot on the Mount of Olives with a massive crowd behind him, you probably would have had a light come on and probably point to said, hey, this Jesus, this could be the guy. This could be the Messiah that we have been waiting for generations and generations, for hundreds of years. This could be the guy. See, the city of Jerusalem at that time had a population of like 20 to 30,000 people. It was one of the bigger cities. It's where the temple was. In this week that is about to start as Jesus enters into Jerusalem, we've talked about for the past 2 weeks, which was Passover. This was a really popular time, a very dedicated time for Jewish people to come into Jerusalem and to study and to worship and to remember the Exodus story. This was a big, big moment for them. So in any time during Passover, it was a 7-day, this was very funny and interesting, it was a 7-day festival that they would do if you were in Jerusalem. If you were outside Jerusalem, it was an 8-day festival, maybe to for travel, whatever. So there was a ton of people that would just flood Jerusalem. It would say at any moment there could be around 200 to 300,000 people that would come into Jerusalem to study and to be a part of this celebration, Passover week. But this time was a lot different. Studies have shown, and people who like to count things, they did a census every single year of how many lambs were slain to commemorate the Passover. If you remember, the Passover was you slayed the lamb, you put the blood over the door frame. That was the Passover to not let the death angel come into your house. So a slain lamb was just a part of the ceremony. And scholars believe that there were so many slain lambs in Jerusalem that there would have been over 2 million people in Jerusalem or around Jerusalem in this particular week. So a normal 300,000, but for this week, because probably Jesus, there is 2 million-ish people around. So when it talks about the crowd that was following Jesus, this is probably a lot bigger than the population of Lexington or whatever town that you come from this morning. So when Jesus enters the city, it was more than just a couple hundred people. This would have been a couple hundreds of thousands of people that were coming behind Jesus. And everything that happened in this moment was intentional symbolic motion, not necessarily from historical moments of Zechariah and Isaiah, but every single one of those meant something of that time, where Jesus riding in on a donkey. A donkey was the least of these animals. The animal that was more about peace than it was power. History has shown over and over again, and we have records of great kings riding into Jerusalem, but they didn't ride in on a donkey. They rode in on massive horses or chariots to declare how powerful they were, of how there are large armies right behind the king to just declare how powerful this kingdom is coming into Jerusalem, whether to take over or just to visit. But Jesus decides to come in showing peace. And before he got there, people lined up in front of him on the streets, and they drew their coats and they put them on the road. This would have been equivalent to what we would be like the red carpet of America, what we see on the TV every once in a while, of celebrities coming in and the paparazzi and everybody just saying like, what about you? What are you wearing? All these different things. But for the Jewish people, it was little more than just a red carpet of the king coming in. But the coat or the cloak for a Jewish person meant everything that you owned. So when Jewish people put their coat down on the ground, it was to represent all of their possessions. So they said, laying down their coats, I am fully devoted to this coming king. The king has me and all of my resources. I give it all to this king because he is entering into Jerusalem. And the other people that didn't lay down their coats went to the nearest trees and picked off branches or palm branches that we've heard from Palm Sunday, and they waved it as Jesus enters into Jerusalem. This sign was a political sign. It was a sign of victory. Because about 200 years before this moment happened, where Jesus entering into Jerusalem, there was a war that broke out around this area called the Maccabean Revolt. See, Judea or Israel at that time had been taken over from a different government. They destroyed their temple, and the Jewish people wanted to fight back to get their land back once again and make sure that the Jewish people were taken serious and they were back on the map. And when they won and they established Jerusalem, they built the temple once again, they did the exact same thing. They went and got palm branches and sticks to symbolize that there is this great victory, this great political and religious victory of taking back Jerusalem for the way that it used to be. So Jesus coming in, they put their entire faith in Jesus to do the exact same thing that happened 200 years before this, which was to kick out the government, which was the Romans at the time, to put Jewish people back on the map so that they can have their freedom like they once had when King David was there. So they were screaming, Hosanna, which translate, please save or save us. So Hosanna in the highest can be translated, God, save us in the best way, or save us by the highest means. But the problem here is this: they seem to have missed or misinterpret something along the way. Because their idea of a Savior and Jesus as Savior seemed to be a little different. For the crowd of Jewish people, remember what was going on in their area. If you've been around us for a long time and studying through the Gospel of Matthew, as he started in the Galilean area and walked down, we kind of see some of these issues. But they were free people to worship God. But not just worship God, they also had to abide by a bunch of other things as well. See, the Roman people were in charge of their area. And they said, look, as long as you don't have an uprising, you pay your taxes, you do the right thing, you listen to us when we come by, then you can worship whatever God you want. We do not care. So their Jewish king, who helped them build the new Jewish temple, convinced them that this would be a good thing if they would let the Romans come in. But over time, the Romans decided they were just going to milk these people for everything that they were worth, rather than protecting them. So they would tax these people upwards of 70%. They had a deal where their land was not their own. Yes, they could worship whatever God, but they got to make sure that they pay for it. The way that they would manipulate the situations is didn't bring Roman people down to tax the people. No. They would convince the Jewish people to tax their own people. They would recruit the Jewish people to tax the Jewish people. And on top of that, the Jewish leaders were just frustrated at this time. They didn't have their land. They thought they were going to have their time and their land to do whatever they wanted, so Jewish people were going to be back on top once again. But in this time, there was the Jewish law and there was the priestly law. And the priests got together and they decided, hey, maybe if all of us practice the priestly law to be the most holy at all times, maybe God will come in our favor and give us back the land because we are worshiping better and more devoted than anybody else. But because of that, taking it out of the way it was intended, they just demeaned these people over and over again, telling them, you're not clean enough, you're not doing enough, you're not practicing enough. So after a couple generations, it was just the Jewish leaders looking down at the Jewish people, just shaking their heads saying, man, you're just not good enough. So when the Jewish people are screaming, Hosanna, they wanted to be saved. Laying down their coats, they thought this guy was royalty. Waving their palm branches representing freedom and their war victory. What they were saying is they wanted a new king. They wanted a king to take all of their burdens, which was the Romans, away. They wanted the taxes, the oppression away. And when Jesus entered in, it stirred the entire town. Everyone was asking, who is this guy that's coming in? The Greek word stirred that we see in our Bibles that Tim read, this is where we get the word seismic from, our English word seismic. Like a wave of people coming into the town, and the conversations was like a wave that started from the temple, or from the gates of Jerusalem all the way to the back, people asking, who is this Jesus? And all of the chanting saying, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. It was like a seismic wave that went from the beginning or the front all the way to the back of this town. For good reason, though. This could be the guy. In their mind, Jesus, what he was going to do is he was going to enter in, they were going to lay down their coats, they were going to wave the palm branches, and he enters the city, and he was going to help remove all the bad things in this town. He was going to remove the Romans, and they were going to go to the upper part of Jerusalem to where the palace was, and they were going to march Jesus all the way to where the throne was, where the king of Jerusalem sat, and they were going to place Jesus right there, and he was going to rule forever. But instead of going to King Herod's palace in the upper city, he doesn't go there. He stops right by the temple. And it says Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned tables and money changers and seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you made it a den of robbers. He cleared the temple he didn't clear the Jewish rulers. He didn't clear all of Jerusalem. He didn't go in and turn over the tables of the tax collectors. He didn't go in and kick out the Roman rulers of the palace. He didn't go and look at Pilate and said, "You are not welcome here anymore." He didn't gather the army and go to the northern borders and just make sure no Roman would ever enter into Israel again. He did none of that. No, he went to the temple and he cleared it. And in the process, he made every Jewish leader mad, and he disappointed most of the Jewish people that followed him into that place, who placed down their coats and they waved their sticks. So what happens when expectation doesn't come into reality? And I think one of the reasons that this story is in every single gospel. It's one of the few stories that you can read it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's in every single one of them, entry towns. And I think this is why. It's because that human interpretation of prophecy doesn't always align with God's plan. Let me say that again. Human interpretation of prophecy does not always align with God's plan. That life might look like it's heading in a certain direction, everything's leading up to this great moment, and you think it's going to happen, so much so that it becomes an expectation. Have any of you all felt like that before? In February of 2023, in Wilmore, Kentucky, just about 10 miles down the road from here, down Harrisburg Road, there was a chapel service that was held on Asbury University campus. It was nothing special about this chapel service. I've watched it a few times. It's because they had chapel multiple times a week. There was a speaker, there was a couple people on stage leading music. They just have an hour or 45 minutes worth of worship. Then they go right back to class as students. But after this specific chapel service was over, most people went back to class, but a few stuck around. And they just continued to worship. After a few hours, people started to notice that music was still coming from this chapel place, and students after class and after lunch went back there, and they continued to worship. And people all around the community kind of recognized that, wait, this university is starting to do something different, and people around and professors started to show up at the chapel. And the very next day, this conversation started to be the talk of the town. Started to become the talk of the state, and the headline saying, "What's going on in Wilmore, Kentucky?" In a town of around 6,000 people, over about in a few days' time, there was as many as 70,000 people that showed up in this little town. If you've never been there before, it's kind of like a bottleneck town. There's only like two ways in. Like this is not a place where like there's multiple places to get in. Kind of like Lexington, there's a bunch. It's like a bicycle wheel where there's spoke posts all the way going down to Rupp Arena and the football field. Like this is not it. There's like two ways in. And right at the beginning of Wilmore on Harrisburg Road, there was this big sign that the police put up that said "Town at Capacity." And I didn't know, one, Wilmore was a town, and two, I didn't know a town could reach capacity, but it did that day. Man, I had friends from New York, California, Texas. Man, they dropped everything and they flew into Lexington Airport because they had to see what God was doing amongst this college campus. And before you knew it, the headlines came out about a few days later that said, "Revival at Asbury." And many of us ministers in Nicholasville and South Lexington gathered together to talk about what we needed to do. How are we supposed to support this? Many of us were praying this specific prayer. Maybe this will be the revival where people flood into the churches because they experience Christ at the university and they have to come and say, "What is this Jesus all about? Tell us more about this Jesus." And maybe this is the revival where churches are going to be planted all over central Kentucky and down 27 because there's just too many people and our current churches just can't handle that many people. Maybe this is going to be like the Cane Ridge revival on the northern part of Lexington that happened 200 years ago, where this stirred in people a desire to preach the gospel. And we prayed that every single day. But after 16 days of this revival, everybody's exhausted. The town is exhausted. The professors are exhausted. The Nicholsville and Wilmore PD were probably extremely exhausted. But after 16 days, classes went back to normal. Harrisburg Road wasn't backed all the way up to Lexington anymore. Us preachers were just waiting. We were waiting for the people to come. But they never did. In fact, 2 historical churches that year closed because they could not afford their building anymore. And one really big historical church building moved to a smaller building just down the road because they couldn't afford to take care of the space anymore. Enrollment at Asbury went up and the seminary went up that next year, but it felt like it didn't change the town at all. And it didn't fix the county or central Kentucky. To a lot of us ministers, when we got back together, it felt like a major letdown of just the possibility that could have happened. It was cool while it happened, praying with people, seeing people receive salvation from their pain. People felt the presence of God for the first time or maybe from a really long time. There are stories of demons being casted out. It was a giant move of God, but it felt more like putting lighter fluid on wet firewood. And the flame shot up like extremely, but eventually it just faded out just as fast as it went up. And back to the story, just 5 days after Jesus cleared the temple on Friday. 5 days after Jesus cleared the temple, on Friday, Jesus went from people shouting his name, "This is the Messiah, come save us," to "We need to kill that man." 2 million people, all excited one way, in just a matter of days, shifted to anger and frustration and disappointment, so much so that death was what they wanted for Jesus to experience. Because the number one reason people walk away from anything in life is because of disappointment. It's the number one reason. See, after Jesus' death and Passover was over, everybody just went home. They acted like nothing ever happened. The disciples were scared and they hid in an upper room because they were scared of getting arrested and killed just like Jesus. Disappointment and being scared because of this Messiah was murdered and placed on a wooden cross for everyone to see and mock. But how do we get over disappointment? How do you get over disappointment when it felt like God was giving you like a job or something, and it just isn't turning out the way that you wanted? How do you get over disappointment when your friends are not what it used to be or what it could be or what it should be? Maybe somebody, when you were young, spoke over your life as a teenager and you were supposed to do something great, and that great just hasn't happened yet. Maybe you planned your entire life. You worked really hard in high school. You got good grades. You went to college, did really well. You did all the internships. You got married at the right time, and it's just been hard ever since. Or maybe you've done all of those things, and that person that you're waiting for to get married just hasn't come yet. Or maybe your health has prevented you from living the life you envisioned at what you're supposed to be right now. Maybe your health has stopped you and your family doing all the great trips or anything. And honestly, just name your disappointment. We all have them. My life is a laundry list of disappointment in my life. I could spend the next 2 hours, which I'm not going to do, about just different times in my life where I've been disappointed because I saw what God was doing in my life, and I saw the path as clear as day. And when it got to the point where God was supposed to show up and do what I wanted him to do, it just didn't happen. And the immature thing is we like to take control, don't we? Like, I have to move, I have to leave. I need new people. I need to go to a new church. I need something new in my life. Or you just make a crazy financial decision right off the bat. And it's all because I need to be back in control. I let God be in control, and it did not happen. See, maturity is demonstrated not just by acknowledging what happened, but by how we respond and act in light of the new knowledge that we have. See, the mature thing is to believe that he is better no matter what happens. And his promises are still true. Because when we take control of every situation, we lose sight of what God is doing because we have placed our eyes on ourselves. Rather than going down the narrow path towards Jesus, maturity is how we respond in light of the knowledge of disappointment. And from my experience, when we take our eyes off the kingdom and place them on ourselves, this is how we feel. We say things like, man, I just can't catch a break. It feels like things are just happening over and over again, and I just cannot breathe. And everything that happens to you, like things that cause you pain, it feels like there's this little voice in the back of your head that says, my world might be over at any moment. And there's people on the outside, and we look at these people and we say this phrase, man, they just need to catch a break. But times, it is not eternal or finite, but internal. This is what we do. Internally, sometimes it feels like our heart is just beating out of control. And it's just beating out our front and our back because we are so worried and filled with anxiety or fear. Studies have shown that 80% of what we worry about, sometimes up to 85% of what we worry about never actually happens. And for the disciples, what they did is they ran and they hid. Judas, one of the disciples, was so overwhelmed and disappointed by his acts, he killed himself. Peter was so disappointed and scared that he ran, and everybody that asked him about Jesus, he denied over and over his even existence with Jesus. And for the rest of them, they went back home and they went back to their old jobs just trying to pretend that their last 3 years of life didn't happen, and they tried to take control over and over again because the prophecies were there. They saw it. They saw the Jesus coming in on the donkey, on the colt. It was time. It was their time to bring everything back, but their interpretation was way off. See, about 2.5 years after revival at Asbury, most of us local pastors pretty much gave up on the idea of anything actually coming from it. And man, we were discouraged. And we lost hope, and because maybe we thought, well, maybe this group of college kids aren't like previous college kids, and we're just going to wait till the next ones roll in, and maybe God will do something with them. Maybe they just missed the train. They didn't, whatever the decision was, they didn't make it happen. And all of a sudden, we started to see revivals on college campuses happening in the early fall. We saw extended worship nights just kind of pop up. We saw the titles, once again, revival at this college and this college. We saw football players getting baptized and then turning around to the crowds, inviting all of the people to be baptized. And right after Christmas, we saw that both college football teams at the national championship openly talked about how much God was changing everything. And every interview that was given, it didn't matter on the losing team or the winning team side, they always said, we need to give God the glory first before we talk about anything. It didn't matter if they won or if they lost. Then a group of people called Unite USA started this tour where just a few preachers were going from college town to college town, renting out their basketball arenas, having worship nights and preaching the gospels, and every single time thousands of college students from all around the city were coming to the city, and thousands were being baptized. And they're still going to this day. And the coolest part about it is this didn't just happen out of nowhere. When these people would come into these college towns like, hey, this all started because God stirred in us something when we saw the Asbury revival back in 2023. See, all of the prophecy was there. the revival on Asbury's campus, 70,000 people coming to the town. We saw it. We could see God was going to do something, but our interpretation was terrible. We thought it was just going to be local. We thought it was going to change Wilmore or Nicholsville or Lexington, and hundreds of churches were going to be planted just in our little bitty central Kentucky. But God wasn't thinking locally. He was thinking nationally. So how do you handle disappointment? You never stop believing what God is going to do, and it's going to be good. By never letting your eyes wander from the narrow path or Jesus himself. It is okay to interpret prophecy in your life. It is okay to see like everything's coming to this narrow path. Man, this is going to be awesome. It is okay to do that because sometimes it happens and you've prepared your heart and you are ready. But sometimes, when you're going down that narrow path that you think and you're trying to interpret this thing that's going to happen and it just doesn't happen. It is okay to feel disappointed or discouraged, but I want to encourage you, never keep your eyes off of Jesus because he will never stop doing things for his glory. He'll never stop. So I don't know where you are in your life. Maybe you are in a season of disappointment. Maybe it's a job problem. Maybe it's health problems. Maybe it's a friend problem. Maybe it's too much rain in your basement. I don't know. But never stop keeping your eyes on Jesus because I promise there is something that is coming. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, but don't lose sight of the salvation that Jesus brings. See, the prophecy is there. Jesus coming into Jerusalem, the donkey, the cloaks, the waving of the branches, the prophecy is there. But the interpretation wasn't just local for them. They thought Jerusalem is ours, Israel is ours once again, but once again, God wasn't thinking just local, but God was thinking, I want heaven to come into every single person. I don't want a king on a throne. I want this king through the Holy Spirit to be in every single one of you. And it started with Jesus dying on the cross. That was the interpretation that they completely missed. But thanks be to God, that Jesus didn't stop well, they didn't get it. I guess we'll come around in 1,000 years. No, he just kept going. And those who kept their eyes on him, and to this day, those who seek Jesus stay on the narrow path, put their faith in him and believe in their hearts that Jesus is Lord, will find salvation. So God, as we continue to read this story, there are so many different things in our life where we can be discouraged. The people of this time were discouraged. We experience it as a part of life. But God, no matter what happens in our life, may we never lose sight of your Son. May we never stop seeking him and believing that no matter what is going on, it is going to be good. God, thank you so much for Jesus and the salvation he brings. Thank you for everything that he brings. God, lead us and guide us to be more like your Son. We ask this all in your Son's name. Amen.